America has a specific relationship with black boys, not with boys in general, with black boys specifically. The relationship documented in academic studies, in federal data, in the records of police departments and juvenile courts and district attorneys' offices across every state in the country. Researchers at Georgetown Law published a study that documented what many black families had known for generations. Adults consistently perceive black boys as older than they are, as more threatening, as less innocent. The study named this pattern adultification, the documented tendency of institutions and individuals to strip black boys of the protections and considerations that childhood is supposed to carry. Police officers consistently estimate black boys' ages as higher than their actual ages. Prosecutors charge black juvenile defendants as adults at rates that exceed comparable cases involving white defendants. Judges impose longer sentences. The specific bias that operates throughout the American criminal justice system operates earlier and more completely for black boys than for any other group. This documentary is about what that pattern produces. Some of the boys on this list were involved in real crimes. The harm caused in those cases was real. We do not minimize that. Some of the boys on this list were innocent. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they were pressured into statements they later said did not reflect the truth, or they were in the path of a system that had already decided what they were before it examined what they had actually done. All of them were teenagers. All of them were black. All of them became the center of cases that changed how America thinks about juvenile justice, about race, and about the intersection of youth and punishment in a country that has never fully resolved what it believes about either. Today we tell 7 of those stories, from the 1930s to the 2010s, from South Carolina to New York to Texas to Virginia, from the courtrooms where constitutional law was made to the cells where boys who were never convicted of anything spent years waiting for justice that came too late or not at all. These are the cases. These are the names. Number 7, the Scottsboro Boys, March 25th, 1931. A freight train moving through northern Alabama. 9 black teenagers were riding that train, young men traveling the way poor people traveled during the Great Depression, moving between towns in search of work that was almost impossible to find. Their names were Haywood Patterson, Clarence Norris, Charlie Weems, Ozzie Powell, Willie Robertson, Eugene Williams, Olin Montgomery, Andy Wright, and Roy Wright. The youngest was 13 years old, the oldest was 19. At a stop in Paint Rock, Alabama, law enforcement officers were waiting. 2 white women who had also been riding the train made accusations against the young men. Within 2 weeks, 8 of the 9 had been tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. One trial lasted a single day. The jury deliberated for less than 5 minutes. The young men had court-appointed attorneys who did almost nothing to defend them. The all-white juries returned the only verdict that the specific circumstances of Alabama in 1931 were designed to produce. The accusations were false. One of the 2 women later recanted her testimony entirely. She confirmed in subsequent court proceedings that the accusations had been fabricated. The other woman never changed her account. But the evidence that would eventually emerge made clear that what had been alleged simply had not occurred. The Scottsboro Boys case became one of the most consequential criminal cases in American legal history. Not because of the crime that never happened, but because of what the years of fighting the wrongful convictions produced. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled twice in their favor. In 1932, Powell v. Alabama established the constitutional right to effective legal counsel in capital cases. That ruling is the foundation of every public defender's office in America today. It is the legal basis of every claim of inadequate representation ever filed in an American courtroom. In 1935, Norris v. Alabama established that the systematic exclusion of black people from juries violated the 14th Amendment. That ruling is the legal basis of every Batson challenge ever filed. the foundation of every legal argument about racial composition in jury selection made in an American courtroom in the 90 years since. Two of the most fundamental rights in American criminal law came directly from the case of 9 black teenagers falsely accused on a freight train in Alabama. The state of Alabama fought to execute or imprison them for years, regardless of what the evidence showed. Some of them served decades in the prison system. Clarence Norris, sentenced to death 4 times, was not pardoned until 1976. The remaining Scottsboro boys received posthumous pardons in 2013, 82 years after their arrest. 9 teenagers, a false accusation, 2 Supreme Court rulings that created constitutional rights every American still benefits from today, and 82 years before the state of Alabama acknowledged what it had done. Number 6, George Stinney Jr., March 1944, Alcaloo, South Carolina. 2 young girls from the community, Betty June Binnicker, age 11, and Mary Emma Thames, age 8, went out one afternoon and did not return. Their disappearance devastated the small, segregated mill town. When their bodies were found the following morning, investigators needed to find someone responsible. George Stinney Jr. was 14 years old. He lived near the area where the girls' bodies were discovered. He was black. In Alcaloo, South Carolina, in 1944, those 2 facts placed him immediately under suspicion. He was taken into custody and questioned without his parents present. He had no attorney with him. He was small even for 14, barely over 5 feet tall, weighing approximately 90 pounds. The officers conducting the questioning were adults. The session lasted for hours. Authorities said he confessed. His trial lasted 1 day. The all-white, all-male jury deliberated for 10 minutes. He was convicted and sentenced to death. From arrest to conviction, the entire process took less than 3 months. On June 16, 1944, George Stinney Jr. was executed at the South Carolina Department of Corrections. He was the youngest person executed in the United States in the 20th century. The chair he was placed in had been built for an adult body. The equipment did not fit him properly. He had been brought to carry a Bible. That Bible was used to help position him in the chair. He was 14 years old. 70 years later, a South Carolina judge reviewed his case and vacated his conviction. Circuit Judge Carmen Mullen issued a ruling that found George Stinney Jr. had been fundamentally deprived of due process. She concluded that any alleged statement he made could not be considered knowing and voluntary, given the circumstances. She found that his court-appointed attorney had failed to mount any meaningful defense. She called what had happened to him a great injustice. Researchers and historians who examined the case over the following years noted that witnesses had come forward over the decades saying George Stinney had been elsewhere when the girls disappeared. Forensic analysis suggested that the physical evidence in the case was inconsistent with what the prosecution had claimed at trial. George Stinney Jr. died in 1944. He was 14 years old. The state of South Carolina executed him. 70 years later, a judge said the state had committed a great injustice against him. The great injustice had already been carried out. He was still gone. South Carolina has never issued a formal apology. What George Stinney Jr.'s case tells us about the specific operation of racial injustice in the American South in the mid-20th century is something that the vacated convictions 70 years later cannot fully address.